All right, hey, welcome, vBrownbag. I am CXI, Christopher Kusek. Some of you may know me from the internets, blogs, my blog, pkguild.com, among other sources. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is PowerCLI in the Warzone, tips and tricks that you can apply to your own organization and environments and such along those lines. So one of the things that often comes up is who out there is actually using PowerCLI? And I've got an audience of people out here. I'm showing that you use PowerCLI, you use PowerCLI, half of you use PowerCLI. The other rest of you don't use PowerCLI at all, those guys in the back. Question is, why not? I can't get an idea why they're not using it at all. But a lot of people don't use PowerCLI for one single reason. It's too hard, it's complicated. I'm confused. What's up with PowerShell? We haven't quite figured it out yet. That's what's going on through people's head. So I want to stress the first point about PowerCLI. Everything can be done with a one-liner. It's simple. It's straightforward. You go through and you're like, hey, here's some examples. These are one of the coolest parts about PowerCLI and this kind of community is the fact that for the most part, if you're trying to do something and you don't know how to do it and you ask someone, you will then find a way to do it, and that will often be documented and shared on the internet. I have a couple examples here, and I have an extensive series of individual one-liners that I use to monitor my environment. So you guys, you're running PowerCLI today. How many vCenters are you managing in that environment or servers? A couple, one or two. So I manage 100 vCenters that I'm using PowerCLI to go through and rock with. And it all starts with the connect VI server. And why? Because I don't want to have to do a single command against 100 servers individually. So I connect to all of my servers once, and I run my commands in sequence, in series. And it gives me the opportunity to use some of these syntax, some of these examples in order to go through and run massive series of commands, whether I'm identifying information, checking for compliancy, checking for general how the system happens to be working and operating, and able to roll it out and test it out. This top one I have here is really useful in that instead of having to log into a virtual machine to find out what its IP and other details are, I can run a single command that will provide me from the command line. Very useful, especially when you may not necessarily have credentials to log into that box, depending upon your role space you're operating on, but you would have credential access in order to query the box. Another example of it being, how many people here are using fixed path disk as opposed to round robin or MRU? So if you have fixed path disk and you're like, we really should be switching this out to round robin. In my particular case, I need to do that to 980 data stores. By hand, that sounds like a lot of fun, but I only want to do this to my NetApp volumes that happen to be fixed. So I, whipped up a little one-liner. One-liners make it easier as opposed to a complicated series of scripts, or a whole number of series of steps. Previously, people would go through and they go like click, 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 wait. All right, now half an hour passes. Let me go work on the next one. And I love being inefficient as much as the next person, but run the script. We're good to go. Let's run a thing that checks it all. Boom, done. Another example is anyone who's taking advantage of syslog servers using VMlog Insight or Splunk or something along those lines. Kiwi, no one's using Kiwi, but your Splunk or your VMware Log Insight, which just recently came out. That's where you go and do hey, I need to, what do I have here? Dump the current configuration, which is probably unset, and then you can use a similar series of one-liners. Actually, I found that in the next section, in order to make your syslog stuff correct, it's a 4 series of one-liners best operated in a single script. Just because, hey, let's be honest, we want this to work, and we want to do this once as opposed to doing every activity over and over again. And I guess the last one would be hey, we want to dump more details, rock through other things. But the real question here is, like I said, you can do everything you want with a one-liner, except for what you can't do with a one-liner. So if you want to detect your VMFS3 data stores and identify VMFS5 data stores, you can use the ESX CLI command, which is great. But if you want to do it en masse, if you do it on a single data store, you're good. You can do it in a one-liner, kind of. But if you want to do it en masse, like checking, I don't know, 1,200 data stores to make sure if they are VMFS3 or VMFS5, let's just say no matter what I did, I couldn't get this to operate in a single line and had to execute it in the form of a script. Nothing I did could make that operate in a single line. If you can make it work as a one-liner, I will adopt that one-liner, but until such a time occurs, sometimes there's a need to do multi-part scripts. Things along those lines where you're using the ESX CLI command tends to be, if you're using 2 ESX CLI commands, the system gets very angry. And let's just say, after you spend 4 hours of parsing errors, you're like, I'm going to spend the rest of my time just having it run as a single script and move on with my life, as opposed to trying to execute it all within a single one line. So are you guys using any of the call commands like ESX CLI within PowerCLI? You know, are you running the latest version of PowerCLI? You are? You are? Are you using PowerCLI? Yeah, that's right, you are. And you definitely are, yeah. But a lot of people find the level of entry into starting to work with PowerShell a great challenge. Not because it's difficult, just because they see it as a series of scripts that are very confusing. So a couple things to get you started in that area to get a little comfortable. Never execute a command that changes anything until you're comfortable. Oftentimes, there's certain command sets, I will do a query, I'll get information, I'll get, but when it comes to setting it, I'll go do it manually because I'll guarantee it worked the way I want it to, because if it goes wrong, well, things don't go wrong if you don't allow them to go wrong. But you make sure it works the first time, it's working out the way you want to, and you're like, excellent, now I'm going to commit this into a set script that's going to work the way I want it to. Then you just write a big script that executes against everything you have. And this PowerCLI is your asset, whether you're running with a single vCenter, 2 or 3 ESX hosts, or 100 vCenters with 5,000 hosts, and several tens of thousands of guests. Not that I'm dealing with that, but let's say I were, I probably would want to script things out as opposed to doing everything by hand. So this is just a high level, deep level insight into some of the tools we have available there. Any questions, thoughts? How deep have you guys gotten into PowerCLI? My dear friends within the audience. You. What's that? You do use it pretty extensively. It's a very extensive tool. It's a very powerful tool that has been, I'd say if we were to take a poll of a majority of admins out there, majority of people architect or run these environments, 20% of them are using PowerCLI. If you think it's more than that, I actually probably think it's less than that, but to be honest, it's yeah, right? Everyone who's here at VMworld probably using PowerCLI. There's 21,000 people attending VMworld this year. Do you know how many people there are who are running virtualized environments, since over 86% of all environments are virtualized, and there's, what, 7 billion people on the planet? Chances are, only these 21,000 people are using PowerCLI. And you look at the communications, it's all Luke Deckens, where it's all Luke D who's telling you, hey, here's how you do this one script. But what we can lean on is community. So when you have I'm trying to do a certain thing, you can ask. You can post it on, Spiceworks. You can post it on Twitter and say, I'm trying to accomplish this particular script. And everyone's going to chime in because they want to help you out. The PowerShell community in general is so strong that PowerCLI has grown to such great lengths where you can do everything with a single one-liner or a complicated script in the event that you just can't get it all to work in a single line. But it's got tools at your fingertips that let you just take advantage of the world. So, your most common one-liners? Most common one-liners? That's an excellent question. It depends. So when it comes to one-liners, I usually try to find a problem. I'm looking for, I'll start with a particular use case. I'm like, networking. I'm going to focus on networking for the day, or series of days, and try to identify things that could be wrong, such as incorrect subnet masks, incorrect MTU settings. So at one point I did a massive search through dumping MTU stacks in order to figure out, hey, do we have ones that are set to 9,000 versus 1,500, and is that correct for them? And when you're scanning across hundreds of vCenters, thousands of hosts, and ignore the guests for a second, just the infrastructure, I found that anywhere from 10 to 15% of my environment was wrong. And then shortly thereafter was right. And I had validation, confirmation. I could then dump it to a script and we were good. And then I moved on to storage. So I actually would walk through each of the layers that's important in virtualization, storage, networking, the compute layers, each individual part, and I would walk through what commands can I possibly do? What problems can I find? And then when I would take all those, and I'd take a whole series of one-liners, and I publish them all to a blog post so someone else doesn't have to go through and figure out what do I want to do. I mean, if you go back and you look at these, I provide the syntax, but more importantly that I provide what it means in readable human terms, so that way you're like, why am I doing this? Oh, this will do this for me. This will change this for me. And I can just execute against that, as opposed to, well, I don't trust, a git command. I'm not sure what's actually happening here. And it lets, as you start working and you work a little bit into gits and you're getting your sets, those who are not comfortable with it become familiar with it, and then they eventually become those PowerCLI rock stars to go to the end of the world.
Are host profiles in your wheelhouse, and where do you use PowerCLI versus host profiles?
Host profiles in 4.1 were awesome, and then in 5, PowerCLI is my friend in vSphere 5. And for reasons I won't go into, I'm not running 5.1 and 5.5 in production, so from a 5 perspective, because of the changes to host profiles, it's easier simply to just have a script that confirms it for me, because, I'd like to use host profiles, but 4.1, yay. 5, great questions, though. Definitely great questions. How are we doing?